Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. Welcome to our webinar on the top 5 do's and don'ts when migrating from Atlassian server to cloud. So before we get started, there's a couple of housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section or the chat section, and we'll try and go through them all at the end. And the slides from today's talk will be posted online for your bedtime reading leisure. Our rough time frame today is about 20 minutes of me talking at you. And then, as I said, at the end, we'll do the Q&A. So let's dive straight in. So hello, my name is Lewis, and I'm the IT operations manager here at Clearvision. So my job is the overall responsibility of our internal IT and the external IT as well for our customers. This, of course, includes the overseeing of our internal Atlassian stack. I'm also very active on Twitter. So if you ever want to discuss anything from today's webinar or technology trends or how Southampton are the greatest football team in the world, you can reach out to me at Lovelock. I always love connecting with like-minded people. So a slide about Clearvision. Who are we? What do we do? So Clearvision are a platinum Atlassian solution partner, and we've been aligned to Atlassian for over 15 years. So to put that into some sort of context, we've been aligned to Atlassian for around about the same time that the first ever YouTube video was uploaded. So it's safe to say we've got quite a bit of experience. We provide licensing, consultancy, training, hosting, and support for the entire Atlassian stack. 2, and this is where the tagline comes in on the slide, to free your team to focus on what matters. There's a shout out of marketing for coming up with that one. Now, the biggest trend that we see in the Atlassian world right now is the move to the cloud. This is because in October 2020, Atlassian announced the server end of life. What that meant was all server products in the Atlassian stack would only be supported until the 2nd of February 2024, meaning customers had 2 choices. They go to the Atlassian Cloud or they move to the Atlassian data center variants. Now, if you keep up with technology trends, cloud isn't a new concept. And to be honest, it makes sense for most customers. This announcement not only impacted our customers, but it also impacted us internally here at Clearvision. We've been hosting our internal Atlassian stack for nearly 12 years. And as you can see by this screenshot, this was taken from our Confluence server with a system installation date of 2010. So nearly about 12 years we've been running that internally. So we, like many of our customers, had a decision to make. Do we move to the cloud or do we move to data center? We had the chat and discussion internally, and our ultimate decision came down to how can we expect our customers to trust us to move them to the cloud if we don't do it ourselves? We have to practice what we preach. Or as our CEO likes to say, we have to eat your own dog food, which is a bit gross. So we made the decision that we were going to move to Atlassian Cloud. Confluence was up first, and we followed a structure. We're going to build a plan, we're going to run it, we're going to learn from our mistakes, and then reiterate for the next tool. And the reason why we chose Confluence first is because it was the simplest system to start with, and we wanted to adopt an attitude of quickest wins first. Therefore, the topic of today's webinar is what we learned and did when migrating from Confluence Server to Confluence Cloud, and our top 5 do's and don'ts for this migration. So let's dive in. Point number 1, communication. Don't slack on communication internally. That's pun intended, by the way. We wanted the business to be aligned to our goal. And the biggest part of alignment is buy-in. We gave everyone in the company a chance to air their views and opinions, as people are far more likely to buy into a decision or a concept when their own views have been aired and listened to. If any of you have read the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, I think that's how you say it, the 3rd dysfunction talks about the absence of commitment. This talks about the idea that if everyone is heard and gets to air their disagreements or opinions, they are far more likely to buy into a decision, even though it may not be what they want. We came up with a clearly defined plan. We publicized it internally, and we communicated the hell out of it. So as you can see on the slide, there's some examples of the way we communicated. There was Confluence blog posts, which we use heavily. There was announcement banners that was put on the tool themselves. There was quarterly town hall updates, which go out to the company. And there was printed notices put in the communal areas, such as the kitchen. In all of our communications, we made sure to communicate why we had to move, who was involved, all defined dates, and what was expected of each person and role, and who or how to contact if you had a question. Then we moved on to our first pre-migration step, which was our second point today. Make sure you garden. Do make sure you complete gardening before you start. Now, I've got written here, assign an owner to garden a space and make sure it's done. Now, that seems pretty obvious, right? But the point I want to raise here is about positive gain. As you can imagine, with a 12-year-old Confluence server, we had a lot of data. We'd been through gardening exercises in the past, but to be honest, to not much effect. The default response of employees in the past when asked, hey, what can you get rid of within this space, was usually, well, I need it all. And I attribute this to no positive gain for that user. So to those who've had children, it's quite similar. If you ask a child to pick some toys to get rid of, their default answer will be none of them, because their thinking is, well, what am I gaining from this? But if you say to a child, if you can choose the toys to get rid of, you'll be making room for new ones, you'll get a far better positive response. So our users knew that the end goal of the gardening was a sparky new feature-rich Confluence Cloud system, and that was their gain. So asking them to garden their existing data was far better received. So we started by collecting a list of global spaces, then across the system, then assigning ownership to employees, giving them a go or no-go decision for the migration. If they gave us a go, then we asked them to conduct gardening in the space of its pages and archive all data no longer needed. Then we monitored each space to ensure it was being conducted. Then for any spaces that were not deemed important enough to be migrated, we move on to our third point, which is archive system. Don't write off creating an archive system. We took this decision pretty early on to maintain the Confluence server system as an archive, leaving it in read-only mode. While we migrated all relevant spaces using the Confluence Cloud Migration Assistant, the CCMA, we felt it was important that users knew that the old system wasn't going away. This also ties into our previous points as it helped with communication and with buy-in. Now, in a perfect world, we would keep all data ever in one place for any sort of need. But in reality, that's not really possible. And given our Confluence server 12-year collection of pages, we knew that anything not migrated or some things not migrated would need to be referenced at some point in the future. So once we migrated, we locked Confluence server down. We considered it non-production internally, meaning we didn't have to align it to production SLAs. And we turned off its failover infrastructure, which saved us some AWS costs as well. And then we let the users browse it whenever they need to in read-only mode. And as I said, this helps with our end user positive gain. So going back to our child analogy, if you said to a child, you can have new toys and keep your old ones, that will never not be positive. Now, at this point, we have conducted a dummy migration. We'd created the new user accounts and we configured the Confluence Cloud system ready for production. But before our go live date, we ensured we conducted our fourth point today, which is testing. Do ensure you test the new system, especially for macros. This is heavily focused on the end user experience. And to be clear, when I say testing, I don't mean making sure that the page has been migrated, although that's obviously an important factor. I'm talking that the page actually works and functions correctly. Despite being closely similar products, there are some differences between Confluence Server and Confluence Cloud. One of those being macros. Yes, the macros from Confluence Server do exist in Confluence Cloud. However, an example of something that we found was broken was the expand macro. When we migrated certain pages from server to cloud, the embedded expand macro in some of those pages just didn't work. Now, the macro does exist in cloud, but the two didn't translate together in the migration. Nothing is ever easy. Now, this was a simple fix. Simply delete the broken macro on the page, re-add the macro back in, and then paste the content in from Confluence Server. Another reason why we kept it around. But to be honest, my team and the team that did the migration, we didn't actually conduct this step. We pushed this on to the end users. But since all the staff were brought in into the project early and they had that buy-in, they were pretty happy to correct their pages as they went, as they discovered the problem. I'd also like to highlight page order and hierarchy within a space, as we found when we migrated entire spaces that some of the pages forgot their own parent page. So just watch out for that. Then, once our biggest issues were ironed out, we moved on to our fifth and final point of today, which was a cool-off period. Do be prepared for pushback and questions. So we've talked a lot today about buy-in from end users and communication, which is extremely important, but you'll never reach everybody. Even if you were to, some people will likely forget the advice or forget how you mentioned something will work. Now, for those of you in the UK, think about the last few years with COVID-19. How many times and places did the UK government post the latest guidance on restrictions? It was on the government websites, it was on radio adverts, billboards, social media, etc. But there will always be people who it doesn't reach, or they don't process it, or who will always just have questions. So we created basic how-to guides internally with accompanying videos, which we then linked to anyone that had a question. This also helped our internal IT team, as when we got tickets into the internal service desk, they were able to link the pages to the ticket. Then, 2 weeks post-migration date, I held one lunchtime an internal Ask Me Anything about the migration. This gave anyone in the company a platform to ask me a question on what we did, why we did it, and how to do something like fix a broken macro. This was then recorded and posted internally. And we are now 3 months post-migration date, 3 months tomorrow. And tickets and questions around the usage of Confluence Cloud are quite rare. So, to recap of our top 5 do's and don'ts. Number 1, communication. Don't slack on communication. Again, pun intended. We talked early about buy-in and allowing users to express their views and opinions. Point number 2, gardening. Do make sure you complete gardening before you start. Remember positive gain, and that will help when asking users to conduct tidy up of pages and spaces. Point number 3, archive system. Don't write off considering creating an archive system. Like the point before, this will help with the end user buy-in, and it ensures you can refer to old data in the future if required. Point number 4, testing. Do ensure you test the new system, and especially look out for macros and page hierarchy within a space. And number 5, cool-off period. Do be prepared for pushback and questions. You can communicate until you're blue in the face, but someone will always ask you about a question that you covered before. It's inevitably going to happen. Now, since everyone loves a colorful graphic, I thought I'd share some statistics about the data moved and our project timeline. So, in total, we migrated 33 global spaces, amounting to a massive near 200,000 pages. In a project that took us roughly 4 months, including all the communication, the gardening, the actual migration, and testing. And there was a Christmas break in the middle of that as well. So not bad going. And then finally, before we moved on to some questions, I wanted to pull out some feedback about the migration that we received internally when we asked the staff to fill in the survey. Now, we've only got 2 snippets here from that questionnaire, as most of the other questions were very specific to our setup, and I didn't really think they'd be relevant. So the first one is, do you understand why we had to change from the old Confluence? And that came in as a 100% yes. Now, I attribute that to our first point, which was early communication and buy-in from the business as to what we wanted to do and why we had to do it. And the next screenshot you see there is, do you find the blog notifications in the welcome channel, Slack channel, helpful? And that came in as an 88.2% yes. So to put a bit of context on that, it's far easier for us to have notifications of new blogs go into Slack on Confluence Cloud than it was on Confluence Server. And that was one of the ways we could get buy-in to the move, because it was a shiny new feature that our end users could use. So that being said, thank you very much for listening, and we're going to move on to some questions. Let me just bring up the Q&A panel. Okay. If you could have done one thing differently, what would it have been? I don't want to say nothing because it went really smooth, because that's also not true. I think the pushing the macro editing and fixing onto the users would have been a slightly better user experience if we took care of it for them. But because they had that buy-in initially, as I said, they were more than happy to do it. But I guess as an end user experience, it would have been slightly better if that was done. I think that's fair to say. That's what we probably would have done differently. That's what comes to mind. Remember, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Excuse me. Another one popped up. How many migration projects has the Clearvision team carried out? Oh, it's a good question. So to be clear, it's actually a different team than mine that conducts most of these migrations, although we are involved. And I believe we're at around 35 different customers. But to remember that a customer has more than one system. So most likely you'll find that they have a Jira, then a Jira service desk, or Jira work management as it's known as now. And they probably have a Confluence as well. So there's kind of 3 migrations within one customer. But in terms of overall customers, we're about 35, I think, at the last count. Another question popped in. What was more daunting, migrating internal apps as opposed to that of customers? To be honest, I think it's about the same. We've been doing this now for quite a few years since server end of life was announced. And we have a run book and a pretty well thought out process of how we do these. So to be honest, it was no more daunting and less daunting than doing our customers. We had to treat it as if our end users in the business were our customers from my team's perspective. So it's kind of no different. We just followed the same run book in it, and it went pretty smoothly. Another one popped in. I just got to scroll. Here we go. What would you say the process is? Would you say the process is much the same when migrating other server products, Atlassian products to server? I assume they mean to cloud. I.e., is there more work involved migrating Jira as opposed to Confluence? Yes and no. Confluence is, we chose Confluence because it's basically pages and spaces, right? It was the easiest for us to migrate. As opposed to something like Jira, where there's projects, you've got epics and issue types, etc., workflow, schemes, and it also depends on what you migrate and how you migrate. So an example of what we're doing internally is Confluence, as we talked about, was a lift and shift of the various pages that we needed, and then we go live over in cloud. Whereas when we do our own Confluence, we're going to adopt a different method. When we do our own Jira, we're going to adopt a different method in which we're just going to simply recreate those projects in the cloud and ask the teams to then start over there. And then if they need to reference anything like old tickets and issues, then Jira will be available in read-only mode. So the question again was, is it more work involved migrating Jira as opposed to Confluence? Technically, I'd say yes for that tool, but it depends on the migration that you're doing and the migration type. But what I will say is the 5 points we covered here today are relevant for whichever tool you do, and that point stands. So I hope that answered that person's question. Are you seeing an increase in the number of server users migrating with the end date approaching? Yes, is the answer. I think when the initial server end of life was announced, one, it was a shock to the community that came so quickly. But I think quite a lot of people took the 3 or 4 year date in the future as okay, well, we'll have a think about what we're going to do. We'll run as we are for now, and then we'll make a decision later. But we're now in 2022. This February just gone, any new improvements or releases of the server products has now ceased. So we're now in the final on life support until February 24 stage now. So we're saying a lot more of those customers go, well, hang on a minute, we seriously need to start thinking about what we're going to do now. And we're having a lot more of those conversations, and a lot more of those migrations are being performed. So the question was, are you seeing an increase in the number of server users migrating with the end date approaching? I would have to say yes. Let's give it a couple more minutes, see if any more pop in. Okay, doesn't appear to be any more. If you do have any more questions, you can reach out to me. As I said, there was my Twitter at the start there, and you can also reach out to us. I'll publicize my email address will go out with the webinar slides here today, and or you can come into our marketing channels or come straight to me and we can have a discussion. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and I look forward to speaking to you and seeing how we can help with migrating your Atlassian stack to cloud. Thank you very much.